Can I welcome you all to today's meeting of the Public Petitions Committee, and as always can I ask everyone to turn off their mobile phones or electronic devices because it interferes with our sound systems. Apologies have been received from Jackson Carlow, who's attending the Health and Sport Committee, and can I welcome Cameron Buchanan, who's in attendance as a substitute, and can I welcome Mr Buchanan to his first meeting of the Public Petitions Committee. Agenda item 1 is Declaration of Interests. The first item on our agenda is a declaration of interest by Cameron Buchanan. In accordance with Section 3 of the Code of Conduct, I invite Mr Buchanan to declare any interests relevant to the remit of the committee. Mr Buchanan?
I have no relevant interests.
Thank you very much. If I move then to agenda item 2 is consideration of new petitions. The first item of business is consideration of 3 new petitions, and as previously agreed, the committee will take evidence from all 3. The first and second petitions will be taken together under PE 1510 by Jodie Curtis on behalf of emergency services and non-emergency service call centres on emergency service and non-emergency service call centres, and PE 1511 by Laura Ross on Inverness Fire Service control rooms. Members are note by the clerk the spice briefings and the petitions, and can invite Mark MacDonald MSP and Lewis MacDonald MSP, who both got an interest in these petitions. And after we hear from the petitioners, it's my intention to ask both Mr MacDonalds to make brief contributions to the various petitions they're interested in. Could I welcome our petitioners today? Jodie Curtis, Laura Ross and Councillor Kenneth Murray from Western Isles Council to the meeting. I can invite both petitioners, starting with Ms Curtis, followed by Ms Ross, to make short presentations of around 3 minutes each. And obviously, if Councillor Murray catches my eye, I'd be very happy to have contributions from Councillor Murray at a later stage. So can I start with Jodie Curtis?
Good morning. Apologies first, I will be looking down while I'm reading, so I'll do my best for you. Good morning. I'd just like to thank you for allowing me to come here and give evidence for my petition today. As you're no doubt aware, I'm a former employee at the Bucksburn Service Centre in Aberdeen. However, that's only the small reason why I originally raised this petition. During the past few months since the creation of the petition, I have spoken with reporters, MSPs, employees of Aberdeen Police and Fire Call Centres, serving police and fire officers, the SPA Completes Department, Michelle Brady of Police Unison for Aberdeen, and members of the public across the north and north east of Scotland. In regards to this, I would like to address the concerns that were most common in my investigations, some of these being, firstly, the lack of provision of the service north of Dundee at the expense of public safety, the loss of local knowledge and expertise, misunderstandings between southern and northern dialects, and the impact the closures will have on serving officers, and the lack of public consultation. It is my intention to do my best to represent these collective concerns and put forth a set of reasonable and fair requests to the committee, which will hopefully lead to a positive outcome surrounding these issues. I'd like to begin with a quote from Dr Ian Oliver, former Grampian Police Chief Constable, that not only supports the notion of these cuts will result in a lack of local provision, but directly addresses the issue of the autonomous nature of Scotland's northern regions, and therefore the importance of their local services. He states, "Local knowledge has a bearing on the deployment of the number and type of officers to an incident. Unless there is a very sophisticated central computer with all of the previous information stored in it, then these fears will certainly materialise. Not only is the personal knowledge of controllers essential, it could be vital in terms of their ability to remember previous criminal activity in the area, or what issues have been an effect on local conduct, and who is likely to be associated with it." An additional police responsibility in Aberdeen is that of the North Sea, where over 70,000 personnel work. The potential for disasters such as Piper Alpha or terrorist-related incidents are significant. Local knowledge of the companies operating in the North Sea and close liaison with them has always been important. It is unlikely that a central system will have the degree of sophistication necessary to address these issues as well as local centres. And at this point, personally, I'd like to remind the committee of the unfortunate number of helicopter incidents ditching in the North Sea in recent years, and how the relationship outlined by Dr Oliver has left to swift and succinct action in response to these tragedies. When it was put to Dr Oliver that the government had offered their assurances that there would be no diminution of service, he responded, "Well, they would say that, wouldn't they?" Apparently, this move has more to do with saving money than it has in increasing overall efficiency. In acknowledgement of the level of expertise and work undertaken by Aberdeen's Force Control Centre, the centre has been externally accredited, and its control room has been heralded as one of the most modern in UK, with huge future-proofing capacity. They also undertake the security and safekeeping of the Royals on their visits to the north. Having experience working at the Bucksburn Base Service Centre, I can confirm the enormous workload they undertake there. Having stated my previous concern about the closure of FSC and the enormous tasks serving officers would have, taking on the added burden of their paperwork and additional hours. In relation to this, I spoke with several officers on the beat. All of the personnel I liaised with reflected these concerns and stated that they already felt stretched thin in balancing paperwork with time on the streets, the latter being the reason they joined the force in the first place. In relation to the fire control room closures, I recently had the opportunity to speak with Aberdeen's fire control room crew manager, Darren Gibb, who shared similar concerns to that of Dr Oliver. He states that Aberdeen is responsible for the safe maintenance of the oil capital of Scotland, the largest heliport in Scotland, a large amount of human traffic pertaining to the likes of Aberdeen Airport and local football stadium, and it has the same capacity as Dundee and Inverness combined. In this instance, it would be fair to assert that Aberdeen Fire and Police Control Rooms and Service Centres are well versed in the management of emergency procedures and specific locations such as St Fergus and Peterhead Power Station, which may be vulnerable to a terrorist attack or that of a large-scale disaster. When speaking in terms of the control rooms being centralised with up-to-date proficient technology, Mr Gibb points out that Strathclyde, for example, is a built-up area, whereas the surrounding areas of Aberdeen and especially Inverness are increasingly rural and sparsely populated. Mr Gibb feels that a proposed system which appears to rely heavily on up-to-the-mark technology will not suffice when dealing with postcodes, and that this will lead to the loss of life when attempting to assist the public. He states that rural aspects of North Scotland, one postcode can cover up to more than 50 square miles. This becomes increasingly problematic when dealing with, for example, a road traffic incident where the victim or victims are unaware of their surroundings and/or the operator is also unfamiliar with those surroundings. There is also the possibility that technology will crash and that the call handles will have to operate manually while the system is being fixed. Both myself and Mr Gibb have witnessed this happening in our role at the call centres. There is prior evidence of such incidents having already taken place when Ireland took the decision to centralise its ambulance control rooms. In 2013, MP Tom Fleming raised concerns and asked Health Minister to reconsider the centralisation of the control room after a series of incidents where issues with mistaken addresses and communication difficulties occurred. It is on one such occasion of mistaken location where an ambulance took over 30 minutes to reach its true destination that an infant lost its life. It is examples such as these that confirm the concerns I previously outlined, which come from all factions of the community, and refute the assertion of the misplaced public concern, as quoted in the minutes taken from the C3 meeting presented by Assistant Chief Constable Mike McCormack on the 30th of January this year. It was also stated at this meeting that there would be no public consultation, as it was generally felt, and particularly by one senior officer, that the issues pertaining to the proposal would be above the understanding of the local person on the street. I believe that the public have a right to be given the opportunity in this decision-making, as it is the public that the service is being provided for, and the collateral of such directly affects them. One final point that I would like to take from the minutes of the C3 meeting was one of the areas marked for further work, and that was the consideration of the opportunities to operate in partnership with other blue light services. To me, this sounded like an opportunity for real information and knowledge sharing, and an opportunity to maintain the services and a percentage of the existing staff in both Aberdeen and Inverness. In conclusion, and based on the information laid out in my statement, I hope that the committee would consider taking the further actions. Firstly, to ask Police Scotland to outline its reasoning for this decision and how the conclusions of the report which went to the Scottish Police Authority were arrived at. Inquire as to why no public consultation was undertaken on the proposals and whether this decision will be revisited to allow the public to have their input to the proposals. Secondly, maybe writing letters to the Scottish Police Fire and Scottish Fire Brigade Union to ascertain exactly what impact the closures will have on the fire and police officers. To request that the First Minister, Justice Secretary, Chair of Scottish Police Authority and Chief Constable undertake to visit each site proposed for closure and to speak directly with the staff and find out their views and concerns. To consider writing to the police and fire unison representatives and ask for their views. Provide evidence that the government, fire and police agencies are looking carefully into the service provided in the north and northeast of Scotland. And finally, revisit the proposal laid out for a coalition call centre, which would enable fluent exchange of important knowledge between blue light services, retain the knowledge of local staff as well as a percentage of the jobs, and allow the retention of both fire and police call centres in Aberdeen and Inverness, hopefully resulting in some restoration of public confidence. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and thanks very much for the very helpful nature of your evidence. Can I now call on Laura Ross to make a brief statement to us?
Hi, I'm Laura Ross. I'm actually a concerned member of the public from the Highlands and Islands. I live just south of Aviemore. Thanks for inviting me down today. So mine is more concentrated on the fire control room in Inverness. The Highlands and Islands have a higher than average older age population, with the 65 to 84 age range making up 16.8% and the 85 years plus group making 2.2% of the populace. The benefits of someone with sound knowledge of local geography and accents cannot be overlooked when dealing with the older person on the telephone. The Highlands and Islands cover a landmass larger than Belgium, and in total this landmass is a third of the total landmass of Scotland. We have many sparsely populated areas with remote farms, crofts and small villages. I would like to remind everyone that Inverness to Shetland is the very same distance as Inverness to Leeds. Throughout the Highlands and Islands, place names are replicated frequently. In many areas, place names are known by two names. It could be Scottish or Gaelic, and quite honestly, it can often depend on your local knowledge to know which one is actually used in that particular area. The Fairer Prices petrol project has highlighted many complexities of the Highland postcodes, where the postcodes, again, as Jodie said, covers the 50 square mile for the likes up of Durness Way. And coming across these complexities, the place names, remote geographies and huge postcodes, the Inverness control room staff have a very unique way of identifying incident locations. And this is aided, of course, by their own innate instincts. And you've got experience that are going on 20 and 30 years in some cases with the staff in there. With the likes of the Lewis Forest fires in 2012, the control room staff actually send the appliances, they coordinate the responses, and it's actually, we have 90 retained fire service crews up. There's only one full-time crew in Inverness, and it's up to the control room staff to actually coordinate the whole response out there, out onto this island. And they will work that out. If you can imagine, it's a forest fire in a very remote place. How do you work out where it is and how do you get the things out there? They'll work it back to the nearest public building or, you know, a sound address, and they'll work it that way. They have a very unique way of dealing with things, and the retained firefighters on the trucks. It must absolutely not be seen as being antiquated at all by SIFRs. It is very much an instinctual way. The control room staff have a very unique way of dealing with their own geography, our own dialects across the area. The mapping and navigation systems the crews use are only useful when they've been directed to the exact location by the control room in the first place. With only single whole-time crews and over 90 retained stations, the relationship between the retained crew members and the Inverness control room staff can never be overlooked. The Chief Fire Officer proposed in a regional paper, it was actually in the Shetland Times on the 20th of March, that he planned to take staff on a tour of the Highlands and Islands so that they could get a feel for the geography of the area. I fail to see how and why SIFRs would think that this would work, other than to garner some kind of public support, and it is nothing more than a look-see exercise. Coming back to the Highlands and Islands being larger than Belgium, I honestly don't think that a fire chief in Belgium would pertain to take any of his staff on a tour of Belgium so they could get a feel for the area. There has been various musings that a co-located multi-agency control room may be built in Inverness, though nothing has been confirmed and nothing mentioned about the fire control room staff being located there. With the main priority being the retention of local knowledge, might this be a compromise solution which all could see the benefit of? The main concerns that have been brought up repeatedly as well by myself and other members here and the media are the dialects that are spoken. We have Gaelic, Orcadian, Norwegian up in Shetland, and we have Doric. Combined with all the regional accents and the large population of Eastern Europeans, our main concerns here, which has been voiced again, is why is this control room being proposed to go into Dundee, which is one of the strongest regional dialects in Scotland? How on earth do they propose that somebody with a strong regional dialect and accent from our area will be sufficiently understood? The regional dialects change so frequently throughout this area, as I've said before, and we have the largest range of local dialects in the UK. One of my main concerns is that we maybe have somebody, an old crofter on the far side of Harris or something that does leave it to the last minute, because quite often they will call and they think the control room's on their own island, or it's, you know, they know where it is, and this gives them confidence. And I'm honestly concerned that an older person might leave it to the last minute through fear of not being understood, and they might leave it too late. One of the other issues that has been highlighted in the Highlands and Islands is that the geography is very poorly served by telecoms infrastructure, or not at all in many instances. At present, mobile phone ownership in Scotland is 92%, with many households only using mobile as their only method of communication. In fact, according to the latest Ofcom report, 1 in 7 households in Scotland was only mobile in the Q1 of 2012. 16% of households in Scotland use mobiles as their only form of telephony in the Q1 of 2013. While it is simple to locate where a call comes in from a landline using the caller line identity, mobile phones require triangulation of masts to locate where the call is originated from, and this requires an infrastructure that is simply just not there, and without a massive investment is never likely to be there. 17 of the staff in Inverness will be directly affected, but overall CIFRs are planning cutting not just a loss of 5 control rooms, but actually 42% of their staff across the board. It has been projected in the strategic intent paper that the control rooms cost £1 million per annum, but this could easily be recouped over 2 years in staff costs alone. There has to come a point where risk analysis and cost-benefit analysis give much more weight to the risk and benefit and much less to the cost of providing public safety throughout the Highlands and Islands. Members of the public in the Highlands and Islands of Scotland were never once consulted in these changes by CIFRs. This approach was similar to the Police Scotland, where a senior officer was quoted and he didn't feel that any consultations with the public were necessary, and I quote, "the complexities of which were beyond them." This is both very presumptuous and very, very insulting. The general concerns and questions of the public of the Highlands and Islands just don't come into consideration now. We are a forgotten population, and we have been insulted and marginalised on too many occasions. All the decisions concerning us are made in the Central Belt, but people that don't live here or understand our infrastructures. People want to know exactly where their taxes are going. People of our area have voiced concerns about the government centralising many of our public services and have lost confidence in the current government and who is allowing these decisions to go ahead. And many have said it will directly affect how they will vote during this referendum. Finally, during the last few weeks and months while working on this position, I have been contacted by control room staff in other areas who are concerned about the responsibility involved in taking calls from Highlands and Islands, and they have indicated the points that I have raised and are of serious concern to them when responding to the incident. At the end of the day, the buck's going to stop with them, and they are the ones that have to go home and sleep at night. I would like to thank the committee for also inviting myself down today, and I hope you will support both petitions and questions and decisions into the closure of this Inverness control room.
Thank you very much, Laura Ross, for your contribution. I now ask if Mark MacDonald can make a very quick submission to the committee, and in particular, I'm sure the committee would be very anxious to look at some direction for next steps. Mark MacDonald.
Thank you very much, Convener, and can I say it's good to be back at the Petitions Committee, having left you recently. I'm here, obviously, Jodie Curtis as a constituent of mine, and as a representative of the City of Aberdeen, obviously I have a strong interest in both the Aberdeen Control Room and also the Bucksburn Service Centre, which sits within my constituency. I think it would be fair to say that there has been a great deal of public unrest following the decision in terms of people feeling that the position of Aberdeen and some of the uniqueness that surrounds Aberdeen, as outlined by Jodie in her evidence, has not maybe been given enough weight in the considerations by the Scottish Police Authority. I think that the external accreditation of the Bucksburn Service Centre, for example, is a testament to the high quality of the service provided there. And while I can recognise the argument that is made that the option will be there for staff to transfer, when you actually talk to staff representatives, you realise that for most of the staff who work in the service centre and the control rooms, that is not actually a realistic option for them, because most of them have more than just their job that is tying them to the City of Aberdeen. So I think that is something that bears consideration and may be worth exploring in some further detail. I think that, you know, what's clear in terms of the evidence that's been given is that there's a recognition that you can't just sit with the current control room situation as inherited, and I don't think that's something that is being sought in terms of the petition, in terms of keeping everything absolutely as it is. But there needs to be a recognition of the geographical circumstance across Scotland, and I think that is something that needs to be factored in. I think that while obviously the Bucksburn Service Centre sits within my constituency, I recognise that it probably wouldn't be likely to be able to retain both the Aberdeen Control Room and the Bucksburn Service Centre. However, that's something I think needs to be looked at in terms of the retention of local knowledge and the retention of high quality knowledge as well. And the final thing I would say is that I think that there is much merit in looking at the possibility of sharing of services in the way that is being outlined by Jodie Curtis. I think that looking at bringing police and fire together is something that should have happened, and I understand that there has been discussion to that effect, but no actual formal conversations or discussions between the services, and it may be worth inquiring of the police and fire as to whether or not these have actually been discussed at a senior level. And the final thing I would suggest is that it may be worth also contacting the Scottish Ambulance Service, who obviously have had experience of going through a similar process in terms of control room rationalisation, because presumably there are lessons that have been learned from that, which we ought to pay very careful attention to. And if there have been issues around that particular process that could be relevant to the police and fire situation, I think that's something that would merit further consideration as well.
Brief comments from Liz MacDonald.
Thank you very much. And like Mark MacDonald, I live in Aberdeen, and particularly struck by the strength of the evidence in Jodie Curtis's petition and in her presentation this morning. But as a native of Stornoway, I'm also very much aware of the situation in the Highlands and Islands. And I think both petitioners have struck the right note that what is proposed here is the removal of these control rooms, not just from one location or the other, but from the entire northern half of the Scottish landmass, and the consequences which potentially flow from that, I think, are very significant indeed. So I would very much support the proposition made to the committee by Jodie Curtis that what we should be looking at, or what the committee should be looking at, is hearing from those who have made these decisions, the reasons on which they reach those judgments, and their reasons for their failure to consult or seek any external opinions at all. I think it's a matter of record that on the day that the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service made the decision to close the Aberdeen and Inverness control rooms, on that day members of the board were presented with figures which substantially revised the capital costs of the various options before them, and on which they had no prior opportunity to consult or consider before being required to vote on the matter. But at least on that matter, the Fire Board had a vote, however poorly informed that vote was. The Police Authority, I am reliably told by those who were present, had no debate, had no vote, had no points made or questions asked about the impact on services in Inverness and Aberdeen and the north of Scotland when the proposal was agreed to close both control centres and the police service centre. And I think on that basis it would be very helpful to the communities affected by these proposals if the board members who voted upon them or agreed them without a vote in the case of the Police Authority were called to this committee to give account for the decisions they've made and their failure to consult.
Thank you very much. I've got a couple of questions. First of all, Jodie Curtis, then I'll bring my colleagues in. In your petition, you call for this committee to do an inquiry, and I think in your submission verbally you identified a few pointers for us, which is to involve the FPU, Unison, the Police Association. Also, you made some interesting points about having combined blue light services. Just for your information, the current work that's been carried out in Parliament generally is the Justice Committee did undertake some work on fire control rooms in March and heard evidence from the Fire Service, and the Subcommittee on Policing has been set up, but it's not specifically taking evidence on the police control rooms. So just to let you know where we are in terms of what the Parliament as a whole has looked at. I mean, do you see that there is a gap in the market for more work to be done in this area, or do you feel some of it's already been covered by Justice Committee?
It sounds like some of it's already been covered, but certainly, you know, the likes of the Bucksburn Centre and the Aberdeen Control Room, I mean, they're amazing places. The work, I did 6 months probationary work at the FSC, and I didn't get through the probationary period. The work there is that incredibly intense. So you have to be very good at your job and what you're doing. So it would be good for you to maybe go down and speak with them, or have somebody speak with them, get the people concerned making these decisions, see exactly what they're closing down and the people that they're taking out of the force.
Laura Ross?
Can I actually follow on from that? I mean, I was speaking between MFR and STV yesterday. I think the whole point that's been missed here is these conversations haven't started within the communities that these people are meant to be serving and protecting. And these decisions were made out with the communities behind closed doors. There was no open dialogue with anybody's communities. And that is not the way the Scottish Government are intending to go forward here. This is meant to be a new phase for everybody, where we're entirely open with the communities that we're serving. These decisions were made entirely out of the Highlands and Islands, out with the Aberdeenshire area too, behind closed doors. There's actually a lot of people in your communities who don't even know what's happening. I've got people that are still coming onto this campaign page saying, what has happened, where's your petition? It's lodged, it was live for 6 weeks. They are not aware. Now, I can only maybe portray it again as the A9 dueling campaign, where they've had roadshows that went round the Highlands and Islands, and they've taken out to these geographical areas where people aren't always, on the internet, on media, on social media. We need to get out and about, and that was actually directly affected when the Western Isles came on board with me, and I had so much help with Kenneth Murray's partner with Charles Nicholson. They'd done an absolutely fantastic job in Stornoway that way, and that was actually more through making them actually aware of what was going on, and people were approaching them to say, well, what's happening? And to try and get the media involved, to try and get this out to the wee man in the street, just exactly what this impact is going to be to them and how it's going to affect them is actually what's needed. It needs to get right back out into the communities.
Thanks for that. And before I bring Councillor Ken Murray in, could just also, for the record, say that at my last visit to Western Isles, I was presented with a major petition on this subject of fire control rooms. Councillor Murray?
Thank you, Convener. Just when the proposal was put forward for combining the forces, police and fire, there was a concern expressed by most fire authorities and police authorities that centralisation would happen. And I think this has proven what we had a concern has taken place. We're not saying a change shouldn't happen. We are probably quite happy with 3 control centres, but strategically, why would you put 3 control centres within the central belt? I think last week's outage of Scottish Hydro's problem in the Highlands and Islands should be a wake-up call to people, because that wiped out just about everything in the Highlands and Islands for about, I think it was 2.5 hours with us. It's been reported that it is possibly as a cause of the number of wind turbines now feeding into the grid system, and how that can create an imbalance if there is a problem, because you don't have the same steady power coming up, and it's more difficult to reroute if there is a problem. So it has been sort of said that possibly this is what the future will bring. So it would make more sense to have something in the Highlands, Aberdeen, something Edinburgh, something in Glasgow, rather than what we have at present from a resilience point of view.
Thank you very much. Could I bring then my colleagues in? I'll bring Chick Brodie in at the end. Can I ask colleagues who wish to have questions or points? John Wilson? Okay. Can I ask if any other colleagues wish to? Anne McTaggart?
Yeah, thanks, Convener. It does concern me, and thank you very much, Laura and Jodie and Councillor, for your evidence this morning. It does concern me, and it does strike a chord that obviously these decisions have been made at a higher level, excluding people in the community, and I'm not sure how much of that has been covered within the Justice Committee or the Subcommittee for Policing. So I would look for advice from yourself, Convener, on that, because it is hugely concerning.
I don't know if any of our witnesses wish to respond to that. I think it was partly an observation. But do any witnesses want to? Yes. Laura Ross?
Sorry. I got a message even just yesterday in the campaign page, and the lady did ask me, she said, can I ask where the 99 calls go through to when it's for the fire service? And I said, well, it goes through to the Inverness control room. You're not getting rerouted through anybody, you're going directly through to the staff up there. And she said, she said it was 2:45 in the morning, and she said that the girl that was taking the call obviously wasn't even on the computer. She instinctively knew of this cut through and that the appliance could get up by blah, blah route. And she said, I was absolutely flabbergasted. She said, because even people that have lived in Inverness all their life don't necessarily know this route. And she said it must have taken so much time off their journey. And she said it was purely instinctual to the control room staff. And she said they were absolutely lifesavers at 2:45 would be yesterday morning.
Thank you for that. Does anyone else wish to come in at this stage? Thank you. Angus MacDonald.
Yes, thanks, Convener. There's clearly a lot of merit in the argument that we're receiving from the petitioners, and hailing from Stornoway myself, I have some sympathy with the issues regarding the Western Isles. Now, it's clear that Unison, for example, are unhappy about the closure of the police control rooms. However, it's maybe worth highlighting that John Duffy of the FBU stated that where the control rooms are located will have no bearing on the level of service that the public get. And that's someone who's clearly involved in the operational issues in fire services. In addition, the Chief Inspector of the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service said, and I paraphrase, the operation of 8 inherited control rooms would build an unnecessary complication and an increased risk of confusion and operational failure into the service's work. Now, clearly, while the operational complications may have been few when there were 8 control centres or 8 separate forces, that's clearly not the case now. Can I pick up on Jodie Curtis's point? She referred to comments made by Dr. Ian Oliver. Can I ask, how long is it since Dr. Ian Oliver was involved in operational matters in the police?
I have to admit, I don't know. I don't know that one.
I think it's some time, and clearly communication systems have improved dramatically since Dr. Ian Oliver was involved in operational issues. He's clearly commenting from the sidelines these days with past knowledge as his guide. With regard to the requirement for local knowledge mentioned by Laura Ross, can I ask Laura what local knowledge someone in Inverness would have of the west side of Lewis, for example, or the south of Harris or Barra, or even northern Skye?
The staff in the control room in Inverness are from all over the Highlands. You know, we're great travellers in the Highlands and Islands. And I mean, you've got staff up there that have been in that control room 20 and 30 years. There is no computer system or software in this land that is going to replicate that innate instinct to those staff. Absolutely no way at all. And I mean, your software and your computers at the end of the day are only as good as the people that are operating them. So local knowledge can never ever be replicated. Instinct, a computer is never going to replicate human instinct when it comes to an emergency and somebody being at the end of that phone. And if I can come back to you here, what's going to happen if your computer systems go down? Because that's exactly what Councillor Murray's talking about. I mean, 2.5, 3 hours, some of the power was out for 8 hours the other night. What happens when your computer systems go down? That goes right over your call handlers, and that goes over to local knowledge, innate instinct, and those girls, or the guys, sorry, knowing where the appliances have got to be and how to use mapping systems, and not relying on software no matter how good and how clever it is. It's only as clever as the person that's pushing the button at the other end.
Indeed, and that is a salient point, and as you've already highlighted, there was the issue of the power outage just a few days ago, which clearly would cause issues if it happened again. Just picking you up on one point, can I? It's just a bugbear of mine. When you were referring to dialects and languages, it's Gaelic rather than Gaelic. Okay, thanks.
Thank you for that. Sorry, Councillor Murray. Yeah.
Back on no one doubts that once the call handlers get the call that they can dispatch a fire engine or whatever to an area and eventually get it there. Part of the problem is getting the call to a call handler now. 83% of the Highlands and Islands aren't covered by mobiles, and yet the statistics showing the increase, what is it, 92% are now using mobile. 1 in 7 households have no landline. You know, these statistics, we have to improve the infrastructure within the Highlands and Islands before any of these changes take place, because sometimes it is an interrogation process when a call comes in, that the call handler has a relationship with the caller to identify where the call is coming from.
For that, any other contributions from members? Could bring in Chick Brodie then.
Yeah. Can I just, if I may, good morning, by the way, just follow up on that last point. I mean, what is different in terms of connection between having a control room in Inverness reaching some of the places that you say can't be reached by mobile, as opposed to Dundee?
There is no difference. All I'm saying is in terms of resilience, that it makes more sense to have control rooms running up the backbone of Scotland. And it doesn't matter, you can run one from Inverness down the backbone that way, from Aberdeen down to Glasgow that way. You know, it doesn't matter which way it is. But I think it's important that you have resilience. Only last weekend, Jibtel went down, and I think all the betting systems in Britain went down online. You know, so the reliance on technology is okay up to a point, but if you have a failure, then you need bodies on the ground to deliver the service, and you need them close at hand. You know, it'd be very difficult to get in contact with Dundee if we have problems with communications like we can have in the Highlands and Islands.
I find that interesting in terms of, I used to work for a company that made what we call fault-tolerant computers. If one part of it went down, it switched automatically to another. I understand the concerns, but given the comments, and my colleague Angus MacDonald's mentioned a couple, but we had Alistair Hay, Chief Officer of the SFRS, saying of the control room proposals, what is foremost in their minds is not to compromise the safety of the communities that we serve or the safety of our firefighters. Now, based on the expertise, and I'll come back to communications with local communities in a minute, if I may. Are we saying that, are you of the opinion, and this is addressed to all three of you, that those with expertise who, by and large, certainly in the fire service, have gone along with both unions and management? And I represent South of Scotland, which has similar problems, and I've talked to the services involved down there, that nobody likes change, but there is certainly, in my view, a determination by those that are running the services that change will be managed and with proper monitoring will achieve the objectives, which is not just all about cost cutting, will achieve the objectives as set. Are you saying that you're concerned about the expertise of those that are involved and have taken this decision?
I don't actually think the control room staff have had enough consultation on this either. I mean, I can get it almost down to 4 control rooms in my head, but how you get from 8 to 3 is beyond me. And you know, especially in the landmass the size of Highlands and Islands, or even the landmass of Scotland, it's not even divvied up right, if you like. I mean, I can go back to the person that talked to me from another call centre. They do not want the responsibility of taking calls from the Highlands and Islands because they're not from there. They openly admit the geography, the landmass, the whole coastal mileage is completely different what they're used to, and the buck stops with them. If an appliance is sent in the wrong direction through a duplication of place names or anything else, or through software failure, the buck stops with them, and they're the ones that have got to sleep at night, and they want more consultation too.
I understand that, and there should be full consultation, and again, I'll come back to that in a minute. But yeah, I just can't believe that those with expertise are consolidating the technology that supports this, whether they're using the fault tolerance I talked about, or don't have the capability through GPS to cover geographic situations that might seem to be difficult. So again, I come back to, if I might come back to the communication with staff. What's surprising me is that, again, Angus MacDonald mentioned that John Duffy from the Fire Brigades Union stated the service the public get is determined by the professionalism of our members. Are you saying the union didn't talk to any of the members as to what was happening?
Well, I mean, obviously I know the unions have spoken to them, but... So
the control room people were aware of this and were involved?
Well, absolutely. It's not necessarily their opinions that have been carried forward, but they're very uncomfortable with it all. And they're not uncomfortable from their own point of view that, obviously there's 17 staff in the Inverness Control Centre, and like somebody else mentioned, they're not going to uproot themselves and move to Dundee. They're concerned about serving their community. And they're concerned, and it'll still go back to the same argument, you will not replace a human being with any kind of computer system. We are the best computer system, a human being, and it's instinct, it's innate instinct with that person on the other side of the line.
although some people would argue that human failure is much greater than computer failure these days. What's the turnover rate of people in the control room?
In Inverness, I couldn't tell you.
I think it's quite high.
Quite high.
Quite high, yes.
So there's a whole training aspect of new people coming in.
There tend to be quite a retention. There's quite a turnover of new staff. They tend to come and go. However, there's a retention of old staff. There's people been there for 30 years onwards, and they're the people that remain, and they're the people that train. We've got ex-local police officers who work there, who've been on the beat with the job and been on the beat for 40 years plus, and they know their communities, and they know exactly how to keep people safe and how to train up new people.
Yeah, I mean, I must admit that. I mean, that's the same in Inverness. I mean, you're talking 17 staff, and many of them are 20 and 30 years in the job. I mean, what are you going to do? Download all the information they innately hold in their brains? They're irreplaceable for your communities.
And they
really
were
are.
being trained and retrained to keep pace with changes in technology, changes in practice.
There's definitely a case for the fact that technology failed on a number of occasions in the 6 months that I was there, when we had to refrain back to using paper. And it doesn't matter what kind of technology you've got. And my husband's in IT, and constantly, you know, it's a constant balance, it's a constant maintenance of technology, especially when you're implementing a new system. Now, what's the collateral going to be in the public when you're trying to implement a new system? It crashes. I mean, the C3 statements say they're relying on up-to-date, modern, good technology with GPS to make this system work. That's what they're stating. So when the technology fails, who's going to be there? Where's the knowledge going to come from if somebody phones from the north?
I have to say, I did run several companies in Europe dealing with IT and IT support for a long period of time. And the issue was to make sure that we were in a situation where that didn't happen. And frankly, it very rarely happened. I think power outage might be a concern, but that's a debate for another day.
Several occasions it's happened where the system has crashed and we've had to revert to paper.
Okay, I want to, one last question, if I may convene, which I think Lewis MacDonald brought up, was the role of the boards in this, and in terms of the communication with them. That does concern me. I mean, it concerns me if the staff haven't been had input to this, but I wonder if we can get some views in terms of where we missed communications with those that would have an impact through their decision making.
In fact, if any of the witnesses wish to respond to that.
It's time to get back to open and honest dialogue with the people that actually concerns. It's back to the communities, and it's back to the control room staff, whether it's the police and fire control rooms in Aberdeenshire, and it's the Inverness control room staff as well. They're the people that need to talk about. They're your expert witnesses at the end of the day.
I don't know if there's any comment from Lewis in terms of expanding upon his statement.
So, I'd certainly be happy to do so, Convener. I mean, I do think the board members who made these decisions could not have been in possession of the full facts of the matter. In the case of fire, it's fair to say that the fire board did agree to defer a decision and to invite comments. And there's one specific comment I want to mention in a moment. But the options which were laid before members were costed in a way that demonstrated an additional cost from the option that finally was preferred of over £2 million. That costing was changed at the very last minute before members were able to consider that. They had to come to a decision on that day. As far as the police authority is concerned, there appears to have been virtually no prior discussion or debate and virtually no opportunity for board members to consider the proposals before they voted on them. The nature of the meeting when it was held was such that there was no effective debate or questioning. So I think, if nothing else, if the committee were to invite members of these boards to attend a meeting of the committee and explain their decisions, then those communities affected would at least understand the basis on which those decisions were made. Can I, Convener, with your indulgence, mention one specific submission to the fire board decision in January, because I think both Angus MacDonald and Anchik Brodie mentioned comments made by John Duffy of the Fire Brigades Union. John Duffy, of course, is a senior officer of the Fire Brigades Union, but I think it's important to say that the Fire Brigades Union Scotland made a submission on the future of emergency fire control rooms in Scotland, which says very clearly We would contend that to provide the best solution for the North Service delivery area requires the retention of a control room in both the North East and North West of Scotland to recognise and ensure a robust response to the unique risks and challenges presented by these large areas. So I think it's important to be clear the Fire Brigades Union is opposed to the decision that's been brought forward to close both Aberdeen and Inverness, and indeed they made the point very clearly that an alternative approach would be much more cost effective than what has currently been agreed in terms of expanding the control room in Dundee.
I appreciate it and thank Lewis McDonald for that. That was only one element I was trying to draw whether or not the control room, because there was a suggestion the control room staff had not been involved, and I think the Fire Brigades Union have certainly a responsibility in that. But of course there are even weightier inputs from the Chief Inspector of the Scottish Fire and Rescue Services, who said their view is that it would be fundamentally wrong for the new National Service to continue to operate 8 inherited control rooms. Concerns about loss of local knowledge are understandable, and they are, but do not stand up well to scrutiny. And that's why I asked the question about the role of the boards. So the union aspect was really to draw out the communication with staff. The submission to implement this change clearly took serious consideration of comments by the likes of the Chief Inspector.
Cameron Buchanan.
Thank you, Convener. I was just going to ask, I was quite surprised to see you had quite a high turnover of staff. Is that due to stress that they come out? And also, if you have problems, do you bring back staff who have already been engaged and gone away and come back again? And also, what is the sort of the training period? You talked about the training period for staff. How long does it take to train them up?
I underwent 6 months training there, at which point I have attention deficit disorder. Unfortunately, because of that, I wasn't able to manage the multiplicity of the job. There's a high turnover of initial staff. I mean, you get quite 20-something members of staff, like myself, going in at that time. Sometimes I think they're, because some of the other control centres and service centres, they don't handle as much information. They do not do as much as the Bucksburn Centre does. So they go in thinking it's going to be not as quite heavy-handed as it is, and it's a lot of work. So when I say there's a high turnover of staff, I mean initially just people coming in to the job. When I was coming in about 2012, 2011, I saw quite a lot of people come and go, but they retain maybe 50% of the people. However, from those, they recruit in groups of maybe 5 to 10 people, and it's about a 50% retention, I believe, but I'm throwing numbers off the top of my head here. However, like I said, there is a high number of staff members in there that have been in there for many, many years, and their knowledge is incredible. They're the ones that mentor people like myself, and they are incredible people. And, just knowing, this is why I'm so vehement about these people staying in the position they are, because I feel safe, knowing that they're at the other end of the phone. Whereas if I'd been on the other end of the phone, I wouldn't feel safe. I'm happy that I love that job, but there was no way I could have done it. And that's why, it's such a highly skilled job that you need people in that job that know exactly what they're doing.
Do you bring back people who, for example,
I'm not aware. That's something I don't have any knowledge of, I'm afraid.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We're a bit short of time. I've allowed this to go a bit longer because I think it's a very important debate. Do any members have any final questions? Okay. We're now going to summation. So if you just stay where you are, we're now looking at the next steps for the committee. I think I pointed out at the start that obviously Justice has done some work on this, and what the committee will look at with petitions, if another committee is doing work in parallel, on occasions we transfer the petition to that other committee. I think that the question, I suppose, for myself and other committee members, is there enough being done by the other committee to justify transferring it, or is there work that we as a committee can do? And I think some of the petitioners, I think Jodie Curtis mentioned at the start, that there's an argument perhaps for having both boards in front of the committee, and Lewis McDonald mentioned that, and indeed other interested parties such as obviously Unison, FBU and so on. But this is obviously entirely a matter for the committee. So I'd just like to get the committee's views whether they feel there's sufficient for us to call in both sets of boards to discuss in more detail, or whether they feel that there's sufficient being already done by Justice Committee and indeed its new subcommittee for us to justify a transfer to that various committees. Going to ask views of committee members. Check, Jodie.
Yeah, I would be not apprehensive, but I think it'd be a bit, it would be a mistake, I think, to call on the boards at this stage until we're absolutely clear what the remit and what action has been taken by the policing, the Justice Committee and the subcommittee. You know, we might find we're treading over the same ground.
It's certainly, sorry to interrupt you, just to say that it's perfectly competent for us to contact the Justice Committee and the Subcommittee to get absolute clarity in what they're doing and discuss this at a future meeting, which wouldn't rule out any of the options that the witnesses have suggested. But I do take the point. We certainly don't want to be stepping on the toes of another committee if something is actively being concerned. Angus MacDonald?
Yes, thanks, Convener. Yeah, I think that's the way forward. There is a strong argument to refer both petitions to the Justice Committee and to the Subcommittee on Policing. However, it would be good to have an idea of their remit first before we officially do that.
Okay. Any other members? John Wilson?
Convener, can I just seek clarification from yourself? Because if my understanding is if we refer a petition, or in this case 2 petitions, to the Justice Committee, we refer them on for the consideration by that committee of these petitions. So there is a technical issue here about whether or not we are actually going to refer these petitions on, or are we going to seek clarification from the Justice Committee at the present moment to find out what they are going to do in relation to the issues raised by the petitioners. Because like Chick Brodie, I wouldn't want this committee to actually be going into duplication with the Justice Committee or the Justice Subcommittee in relation to the issues raised, and both committees calling in the same witnesses, because I've particular views about senior staff and officials from public bodies being repeat witnesses in different committees in this Parliament. So I would suggest, Convener, that what we do is, rather than refer the petitions on, is we contact the Justice Committee clerks and Convener to seek guidance on the remit that has been given to the issues that they are dealing with, and where there is no crossover in terms of the issue, then I think we as a committee could deal with those subsequent issues, rather than, as I said, just repeat the work that another committee of this Parliament is doing.
I think John Wilson makes a good point there. I think that what my intention was is to seek advice from the convener and the Justice Committee on what work they had carried out in the past, but also, more importantly, what evidence they hope to take in the future. Because my understanding that the Subcommittee on Policing has not specifically taken evidence on police control rooms. So I think what I'd like to do is get clarity, if the committee agrees, from the other committee, and then discuss this again at a future meeting when we've got full intelligence in front of us in order for us to make the next step. It is important that we don't duplicate what other committees are doing. Does that satisfy you, Mr Wilson? Are all committee members happy with that course of action? So, as I think you've picked up, where obviously this is a very important set of petitions, we are going to continue this to take further advice and then revisit this at a future meeting, which either will put this to the Justice Committee or will pursue a course of action that doesn't duplicate with the other committee. So we're delaying this to get further information, but I think all 3 witnesses, thank you very much for coming along. I think you gave very excellent evidence and questions, and this is a very serious topic that we will take very seriously. And I will suspend for 2 minutes to allow our witnesses to leave and our new witnesses to join. Thank you. Restart our committee, and the third current petition is PE 1512 by Bill Chisholm on amendments to the Freedom of Information Scotland Act 2002. Members have a note by the clerk, the Spice briefing, and the petition and submission from the Scottish Information Commissioner. Could I welcome the petitioner, Bill Chisholm, and Lisa Brown to the meeting, and invite Mr Chisholm to make a short presentation of around 5 minutes to set the context for the petition, after which I move to questions. Mr Chisholm.
Thank you, Mr Convener. As a council taxpayer who contributes about £250 a month to my local authority, I've always taken a keen interest in decisions made by my local government officials and elected councillors, decisions which enable them to spend other people's money. But before the Freedom of Information Scotland Act 2002 came into force, it proved to be extremely difficult, if not impossible, to ask councils and other public bodies for even basic information. And although I welcomed the Freedom of Information Scotland Act 2002, which meant authorities had to divulge information many of them would have preferred to keep secret, I believe the FOI system has suffered from get-out clauses, which allows far too much information to be classified as exempt. I'm sure that many requesters give up at the first hurdle when their council, health board or government department refuse to provide a meaningful answer. I also believe that all FOI-compliant bodies should have to publish their responses to requests on their respective websites. I understand publication is not compulsory at present, which enables some authorities to avoid scrutiny. However, until my recent experience with a Freedom of Information request to my local authority, I was unaware that those organisations covered by the Act are not duty-bound to give accurate and honest answers or to supply up-to-date information. Surely without such a built-in caveat, the FOI system's credibility is diminished. On the other hand, if accuracy and honesty were to be guaranteed, then FOI would become an even more powerful weapon in the quest for knowledge. In my own case, I asked a straightforward question seeking details of the legal fees incurred by my council during a data protection appeal tribunal. They claimed to have spent only £13,000 on the entire legal process, despite having told a different requester 6 months earlier and before proceedings were completed that the bill had reached almost £20,000. Because I realised their response to me had been false, I immediately challenged their answer and was then told the actual expenditure totalled over £47,000. A senior finance official claimed the £13,000 figure quoted originally had been supplied, quotes, in good faith, end quote. I was left with the impression that the numbers had been plucked out of thin air. Had I not taken issue with the response, then my council would have been able to convince the public their appeal had only cost £13,000 of public money rather than the actual total of £47,000. The experience left me with the feeling that the FOI system could be undermined if public authorities failed to supply truthful responses to requesters. So I decided to pursue the issue with the Scottish Information Commissioner and beyond. But as you will see from the background accompanying the petition, both the Scottish Information Commissioner's Office and Nicola Sturgeon, in her capacity as Cabinet Secretary for Infrastructure, Investment and Cities, confirmed in correspondence with me and my constituency MSP that information supplied in FOI requests is not necessarily accurate or up-to-date. And if a requester is dissatisfied because he or she believes that the information is misleading, inaccurate, contains errors, or is otherwise deficient, this is not something that the Commissioner can address in terms of FOISA. No one can estimate or even hazard a guess as to how many inaccurate or misleading responses have been issued since the Act became effective in 2005. However, one study suggests up to 1 in 4 FOI responses could be inaccurate, so surely action is needed to discourage further examples of freedom of disinformation. I am led to believe that a fair number of MSPs use freedom of information requests to uncover information deemed to be in the public interest. So an additional clause or two in the 2002 Act demanding accurate responses to requests would benefit politicians as well as the man and woman in the street. I would respectfully suggest such an amendment might also reduce the number of requests for review and could even discourage the practice of issuing incomplete responses or complicated answers designed to cover up or confuse. I believe the Information Commissioner should have the power to investigate, but only if a requester provides evidence of an obviously misleading or inaccurate response, as was in my case. There seems to be some confusion on the Commissioner's part about what the petition is trying to achieve. No one could expect the SIC to ensure that every response to a FOI request was accurate in every detail. But if an authority deliberately sets out to deceive and a requester can back allegations of deception with hard facts, then the matter is surely worthy of investigation. When wrongdoing is uncovered, then there should be sanctions available to impose by the Commissioner. I had suggested monetary penalties, but perhaps the politicians might think a system of fines would not be appropriate, as it would inevitably penalise the taxpayers who fund public authorities. Maybe a slap on the wrist in the form of a reprimand, combined with the accompanying negative publicity, would be sufficient to bring culprits to book and act as a warning to others. I hope the committee sees some merit in my petition and is prepared to give it further consideration. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your contribution. And I can also say to Liza Brown, do catch my eye if you wish to come in at any stage during our questioning. My first couple of questions, and I'll bring in my colleagues. You'll know that the Scottish Information Commissioner has said that the changes, and I quote, are not needed, would not be workable in practice, and may have come about as a result of misunderstandings of current provisions of the Act. What's your view on that, Mr Chisholm?
Well, the Commissioner, I had correspondence with her before I put in my petition, and the point she made to me was that she could not investigate allegations of inaccuracy. She says the thing is unworkable. I don't see that that is the case, because a simple change in the law would facilitate that, and there would be relatively few cases, in my view. There wouldn't be a whole host of new applications. In my particular case, I couldn't go through the process because before I could apply for a review, my counsel actually gave me the correct information. But it was only because I knew the answer was false in the first place.
Thank you for that. My next question is, you'll know that Section 65 of the Act makes it a criminal offence to alter, block or in some ways change information, and the Commissioner has the power to refer to the Court of Session. Is there not sufficient powers within the legislation to stop?
I would like to know how many cases have been referred to the Court of Session. And the survey that was done shows that perhaps 1 in 4 answers are inaccurate. So why have none of those been either referred to the Court of Session or gone to some other... I think in some cases they can go to the police, can't they?
Right. Do you have the information how many cases were referred to the Court of Session?
Sorry, no, I don't.
Right.
I just wondered how many had been.
Yeah, right. Well, I'm sure that's something the committee would bear in mind in terms of next steps. Yep. And the other question I just want to clarify is, what action would you like this committee to do in terms of bringing forward your petition, or the recommendations in your petition?
Well, as I said in my presentation, I think a simple few words included in the Act, or an amendment to the Act, just simply saying that public bodies in responding to requesters are duty-bound to provide accurate and up-to-date answers. That's basically it.
Thank you for that, and I bring in my colleagues. Chick Brodie.
Yes. Good morning.
Morning.
Morning. Just following on from one of the questions that the convener made in terms of Section 20 of the Act. Can you just help me? When you found this information was incorrect, did you follow the process which goes back, you went back to presumably Borders Council and asked them to review the information they provided to you? Well,
I keep a close eye on the Council's FOI website, and in April 2013 they had told a requester they had spent £20,000 on this legal process, and I waited until the whole process was over, then put my question in, and the answer came back 13,000, so I knew it to be false.
Well, sorry to interrupt, Mr.
So, on the same day that I received the answer, I sent an email to the FOI person at the Council and immediately got a revised set of statistics without even going to review.
But doesn't that process that you followed confirm that the process in the Act, in particular that section, is robust, because you followed it as you would, if you thought the information was incorrect, then you had the right to go back to the authority to review their answer, which you did, and in which they revised. So I'm not sure what we're trying to achieve if, in your particular case, as I understand it, that you actually followed the process in what is generally a fairly robust act.
Well, I didn't follow the process because before I could go to the Commissioner, I would have had to put in a review. And I didn't get a chance to put in a review because, as I say, it was only because I knew that the Council's answer was false that I was given the correct figures. If I hadn't known that, then they would have, in the words, got away with it.
No, but my point being that you didn't get the correct information under an FOI, then you went back and asked them, and they gave you the correct information, which is what the Act provides for before you go to the Commissioner. So, in fact, your particular case actually, and well done, by the way, confirmed that that's the way the Act should operate.
Yes, but does it not also mean that if I hadn't known that the answer was false, then the Council could have given out a false figure and got away with it?
Well, I think it's not a question of, certainly, again, because of your attention to the detail, confirmed that the information was wrong. But even if you suspected it was wrong and you didn't have anything to base that on, you still had the right to go back to the authorities and say, I don't believe your number, please go and check it.
Yes, I did that.
Good. Well, I think that's the point.
Thank you. Can I ask other members who wish to make any comments on this? John Wilson.
Convener, good morning, Mr. Chisholm. Thank you for your response to the Scottish Information Commissioner's suggestion that we close this petition down on the first hearing today. And I'm intrigued by the figures, and I know the figures are from the Bureau of Investigative Journalism, who you have quoted in your submission, saying that almost 1 in 4 of all FOI request responses contained inaccurate information. Following on from Mr. Brodie's point, how do we ensure, if we don't get a change in the legislation as the Information Commissioner suggested, how do we ensure local authorities provide accurate information to those who make an FOI request to them?
Well, at present there is no mention of accuracy in the Act, and I think your own SPICE briefing does confirm that. Yep. So would it not be advantageous to have a guarantee or a written guarantee of accuracy included in the FOISA Act?
I would agree with you in terms of the accuracy. And one of the major issues that I've identified in the past is the way that some local authorities record the decision-making process. If you were sitting in the earlier discussion in the previous petitions regarding decisions being made at board meetings of both the police and fire and rescue services, where unless there are accurate minutes taken or detailed minutes taken of decisions and who participated in these decisions, then does it not become impossible for some individuals making an FOI request to actually be provided with the information required, accurate information required, because local authorities do not record the decision-making process in an accurate manner?
I have examples in my own council's case where no records at all have been taken before decisions have been made. So that makes it even more impossible, but I would agree with you on that, yes.
Convener, I think the case here, and I think the issues have been raised, and I should put on record that I welcome the initiative by the Scottish Information Commissioner to actually respond to the petition prior to us actually hearing it as a committee. But I don't think that stops this committee from further investigating this and possibly at some later date asking the Information Commissioner to come along and give evidence to this committee as to how they can interpret the current legislation delivers what the people of Scotland expect FOI legislation to deliver. Because if 1 in 4 of the responses and FOI requests could be seen as being inaccurate, then that means 25% of the population making FOI requests may be getting answers that are not accurate and may be misleading. And unless, in your case, Mr Chisholm, where you knew the information to be inaccurate, you were able to then challenge and get the accurate information from that local authority.
That is the only piece of research I have seen done about the level of inaccuracy. There may be others, but I haven't been able to find them.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. I think that's a useful point as far as inviting the Information Commissioner to a future meeting of the committee. Can I ask other members who wish to come in? Chip Road, I think you wanted to come in.
Just one last point, because currently I'm in a situation not with a local council, but with the Westminster Government. And it was instructive to me, and I thank you very much for bringing this forward, because it highlights two things, in my opinion. The Section 65, which says it's a criminal offence to alter, deface, block, erase, destroy or conceal, might make me produce a follow-up letter to the Advocate General on an issue that I have. The second point, though, is as in other cases where we have commissioners who oversee, or were supposed to oversee, or trying to oversee the function of government, I think it's probably well worthwhile reminding all public bodies that we don't produce these FOIs just for fun, and that just as this Petitions Committee belongs to the people of Scotland, so the Commissioner and those applying FOI requests should understand that it has the full backing of this Parliament, and perhaps we need to refresh in the minds of everyone that that facility, just as this facility, is there for their benefit and not for anyone else's.
Thank you for that. Other members wish to come in who perhaps haven't spoken? Yeah, Cameron Buchanan.
Can I just go? Did you have any suspicions, Mr Chisholm, that they were giving this figure deliberately inaccurately or not? Were you suspicious that they were just throwing out a figure?
Well, I think they were trying to play down the amount of money they'd spent on the appeal from day one. Yeah. But as I don't know whether it was a deliberate deception, but surely if they'd told another requester 7 months earlier that they'd spent £20,000, and then at the end of the process they tell me that they'd spent 13, there must be something amiss.
Could that not have just been a inaccuracy? Because obviously that first petition was in the public record, but not the second one, the first amount. So therefore, if they'd have given the same amount, would you have questioned it? If they'd said it was 20,000 when you asked your question, would you have questioned it again?
Yes, because there had been 2 tribunal hearings after the first answer was given, so they must have spent more. Therefore, the figure was bogus, in my view. Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. I don't know if Eliza Brown used to add anything or raise any.
I'm just here for moral support.
All right, yeah, that's not at all. My daughter. It's not compulsory. Do members have any other points they wish to put to our witness? I think John Wilson made a good point about inviting the Information Commissioner to come before the committee, in which we could obviously ask questions about this particular petition. How do members feel about that as an option? And presumably also, because we're talking about future government legislation, if there's any amendment to the Act, it would be useful to get the Scottish Government's view whether they intend to bring any fresh legislation in this subject. Did you have a point, Anne McTaggart? Yeah.
I had read that the last, it had been reviewed and was a wee while back, so I think it's important that we do follow, as John Wilson had mentioned earlier, and we do take further evidence on this.
Just in terms of timing, do members wish to get an answer back from the Scottish Government before we invite the Information Commissioner, or do you want to do both at the same time? John Wilson?
I mean, I'd be quite happy to get the right to both at the same time, because I'd be keen to get, given that the Cabinet Secretary has been quoted, then I think it would be useful to get the Scottish Government's view on the issues raised by Mr Chisholm, and whether or not there would be any inkling as to whether or not the Scottish Government would bring forward amendments to the legislation to allow us to amend it in a way that would allow for accurate information to be provided to all FOI requests.
Okay. So I think the committee is quite clear then that we obviously wish to continue the petition. We will be writing to the Information Commissioner inviting her to come before us in the future, a date to be organised, and we're writing to Scottish Government to see if there's any intention to legislate in this area. Angus MacDonald, you had a point?
Yeah, thanks, Convener. Happy to agree to that, but I was just wondering if we could ask Spice to provide us with information regarding Section 65 of the FOISA with regard to how many cases have been referred to the Court of Session.
Yeah, you can ask the Commissioner of a right to anyway.
Well,
yeah, thank you. Well, if we put it in the, if we put that in the Commissioner's letter at the same time, then you should obviously know, because clearly there's a big issue here. If there's false, allegedly false FOI information coming out, that there is a criminal issue around this. So it's important, I think, we get some clarity on this. Do any other members have any other points before we conclude? Are members happy with that course of action? Thank you. Could I thank Mr. Chisholm for coming along, and I'll suspend for 1 minute so I'll allow our witnesses to leave. Thank you. Well done. Okay. If I could continue our meeting, we're now on agenda item 3, consideration of current petitions. The next item of business is consideration of 3 current petitions. The first 2 current petitions will be taken together, and they are PE 1098 by Lynn Merrifield on behalf of Kingseat Community Council and PE 1223 by Ron Beattie on school bus safety. Members have a note by the clerk and the submissions. Stuart Stevenson, MSP, has had a long-standing constituent interest in this petition. I'm not sure if Mr Stevens is going to be able to attend today, but clearly just want to flag up the, I think, good work he's done on this particular petition. I think there is a number of overlapping issues about these petitions. So just for clarity, we did agree that we would take evidence on the progress of the Section 32 order, which, as members will know, is the transfer of powers effective from Westminster to the Scottish Government. However, there has been a letter from the Minister of Transport and Veterans on this subject, so it may be wise if we postpone evidence session on this, because clearly there's progress being made, and Keith Brown has put some policy out in this issue, and I think that's good to hear that there's excellent progress on this particular issue. And in relation to PE 10...
After 4 years, it's excellent progress.
Well, Mr Brodie is welcome to his views on this. But in relation to petition PE 1098, the committee wished to write to the Minister for Transport and Veterans requesting a more detailed timescale for the devolution of powers to Scottish ministers in order that the progress of the process can be monitored. And then finally, in relation to PE 1223, the committee wished to write to Transport Scotland to seek further information on the work it's undertaking with local authorities on signage and lighting, and whether it still intends to assist with evaluations of some pilot schemes with a view to develop them nationally. So I apologise to the committee if this is a bit complicated, but I think there's a couple of overlapping issues. And I would also flag up, I think, the very helpful reply we got from the Welsh Parliament on this particular issue. And I think they've done some really good work here, as they've done on other issues that we're concerned with, such as organ transplantation. So I throw that up to the committee and get committee views on next steps. Chip Brodie?
Yeah, I agree in terms of PE 1098 that in view of the announcement contained in Keith Brown's letter, that we might wish to postpone oblique monitor what's actually happening with the transfer. I think in terms of PE 1223,
yeah,
it was made quite clear in section 12 of the note from the clerk that it is intended that powers relating to signage and lighting, which are the main issues detailed in said petition, that they will remain reserved. I mean, I may not be here in 4 years' time. I'm on earth, I mean. We just, I don't see, we seem to be banging our heads off a brick wall when it comes to getting these things moved. I'm not going to mention September, but I'll just mention it. But it's just, I just don't understand why these things take so long. but I'm glad that at least on one of them we've moved along a bit.
Yeah. So can perhaps do one at a time then? So the suggestion I've got is that we postpone our evidence section on the section 32 order. Can I just check whether committee members are happy that we do that in light of Keith Brown's letter? Yes, indeed. Right, thank you.
John, if we're going to let the Minister slide, as you've just indicated, I think what would be useful, and I know you're going to come into point 2, that we ask the Minister or the Scottish Government to give us a timetable and when they expect the devolution of the powers to be transferred to the Scottish Government. But I think we still indicate we reserve the right at some future date, if we deem it necessary, to invite the Minister along to give evidence. But as I said, I don't think we'll let the Minister slide.
No. Well, I would just emphasise, in my view, is that we're just postponing this, and if, in light of further information, if we discover that we need to have a further evidence session, I'm sure the committee will want to do that. So I agree with John Wilson, we need to keep that option open. Do other members wish to contribute? So are we... Chip Brodie?
I don't understand what goes through the minds of people in the Westminster government, where they say, yes, it's okay, these powers can be granted to Wales, but yeah, we'll take an eon to decide whether or not they should be transferred to Scotland.
And I noticed in the letter from the Welsh Assembly Minister that there was still some powers still held back on technical specification. So the Westminster's had a position then of not allowing a certain level of powers to go and allowing others. So we just need to keep a careful eye on this. So our members, can I just confirm then what we're doing, that we are temporarily suspending having an evidence session with the Minister for Transport and Veterans, and in relation to PE 1098, we're going to write to the Minister for Transport and Veterans requesting a more detailed timescale for the devolution of powers, and in relation to PE 1223, we're writing Transport Scotland to seek further information on the work it's undertaking with local authorities on signage and lighting, and whether it still intends to assist with evaluation of some pilot schemes with a view to develop them nationally. Cameron Buchanan?
Do we still have these powers? I mean, like the Welsh say, you know, they're putting CCTV buses, they can do exactly the same as we can. Is that not correct? Do we not that we can do certain things that we haven't yet done?
Well, I think what we need to clarify with the Scottish Government is there are some actions they wish to carry out that they don't have the powers to do, and that's the Section 32, so we want clarity on that. If there's areas where they do have the powers, we need to be clear how fast that will be pursued. But there's no doubt that, I mean, I've certainly spoken to Keith Brown about this, and I mean, he's certainly very keen to get the powers on as far as seatbelts are concerned. That's crucially important. John Wilson?
Mayor, just on PE 1223, the issue regarding whether or not Transport Scotland, I know from the recommendation that we're suggesting it still intends to assist with the evaluations of some of the pilot schemes. I would want to put it in stronger terms. I would want to put it in terms that Transport Scotland should ensure that the pilot evaluation schemes are concluded and the evidence from these pilot schemes be published. And basically, so we can take it forward. Because I think we need the evaluation to be carried out, we need it to be published, to strengthen, hopefully, the argument that Mr Beattie has been pursuing for the last almost, I think it's almost 8 years now, in relation to the signage on school buses and making that appropriate for the school transport. So I would suggest that we actually strengthen the wording of that and say to Transport Scotland that they should conduct the evaluation and they should publish a report as early as possible to allow us to take this petition forward.
Are members happy with John Wilson's suggestion? Yeah. Is there any further comments on petitions? Right. Thank you for that. And John Wilson?
Just one point, Convener. Could I note that Mr Beattie isn't in the gallery today, and this is one of the very few occasions that Mr Beattie hasn't been present at the committee meeting where we've considered this petition, and I trust Mr Beattie is keeping well, and it's due to other circumstances he's not been able to attend today.
Yeah. I certainly note John Wilson's point. I mean, he's been extremely dedicated to his petition and taken a great interest in it over a number of years. Thank you for that. Could I go to the third and final current petition today? It's PE 1503 by Mike Burns on behalf of the average speed cameras in the A9 and not the answer on a review of A9 speed camera proposals. Members have a note by the clerk and submissions. Members will know that I've had some involvement in this, in that I particularly supported the HGV speed limit increase, which is associated with the average speed cameras. The government's position was that they needed average speed cameras in order to do a pilot on whether increasing the speed limit would work. So that was one element in it. Mr Burns, I think, has done a really in-depth study in his petitions, got a large number of signatures on it. It is a difficult and complex area. We've obviously written to a number of organisations. The bulk of them, as the clerk has said in the report, were supportive of average speed cameras. There was a couple of organisations that had an opposition, SCDI and Federation of Small Business. And there was some debate about whether Mr Burns had been invited to meet the chair of the A9 safety group. Now, I won't get into arguments about who said what, but my own view in this is I would prefer that Mr Burns does meet the chair of the committee and to see whether there is any common ground between what's been proposed and what Mr Burns is suggesting, because he's put forward a 20-point plan. He's put a lot of work into this. And while at one level we all accept that excess speed is a factor in accidents, there is obviously other behaviours that cause it. For example, in terms of overtaking, issues around road design, and we know that the Scottish Government has got plans for dualling, which obviously will make the road safer than it currently is. So my suggestion to the committee is that we do write to Mr Burns and ask if he will take up the offer, and also write to the A9 Safety Group, and that once there's been a meeting of minds between the groups, we then discuss whether we need to take further action on this, because obviously we've already written out to the safety organisations across the country. And the government's made its views very clear on this, which is that they're going to go ahead primarily on safety grounds. So that would be one suggestion to have to committee, but as always, it's up to committee members to decide the next steps. Chair Brodie?
Two things. First of all, I think Mr Burns has already met the safety group, has he not?
Well, certainly there's been a debate in his submissions which come back in about the chair had offered a couple of meetings and that wasn't successfully seen through, and Mr Burns has got his own view on this. So rather than get into who said what, I'm really suggesting is that there is a formal meeting. It has been offered, and once Mr Burns then has concluded that, we can see whether there's any leeway, any support or otherwise of the proposals. Because undoubtedly this is a huge issue, not just in Highlands and Islands, but the issue of average speed cameras does affect other roads, such as the A77, and there's some experience of how successful that has been there.
Yeah, I think the second thing is listening to Morning Call driving through here one Tuesday. There was a discussion on the A9 cameras, and I have to say the overwhelming response was, it's not just the speed cameras, it's a complementary package of training and other mechanisms which I understand Transport Scotland are putting together in discussion with the A9 Safety Group. So, I mean, I'm happy to support your proposal, but I think any idea that this policy will change, so it's going to have to, discussion's fine, but I think there's a recognition that it ain't going to change anything.
I think also just to put on record that I think the other aspects that are being developed by the A9 Safety Group, which members will be aware of, I think are useful, like the installation of two-way traffic signings and some carriageway sections, including the vegetation. It's certainly been an issue that I've picked up from constituents, and the review of collision statistics for the route, because there's some debate between the petitioner and Transport Scotland on figures, which I would like to get some clarity on. But I do accept Chair Brodie's view. It's quite clear that the government is going ahead with this, and this is not going to change. I merely just want to go the extra mile, no pun intended, with the petitioner to ensure that this meeting does take place. We hear what happens, and then we look at it in a future meeting. Okay. John Wilson?
I think you're right. I think we should ask in the strongest possible terms those who are responsible for trying to arrange a meeting. There's a meeting that Mr Burns can attend, because there's no point in asking them to set meeting dates which Mr Burns can't attend. And hopefully that meeting will bring together the views, and hopefully Mr Burns will get some of the thinking and decisions behind the actions that are being taken by the A9 safety group. I just think it's particularly relevant given that the A9 sections of the A9 were closed off yesterday again due to another road traffic accident. Both carriages were closed off in either direction. So there are issues that still need to be clearly identified, and I think some actions such as lifting the speed limit for trucks may be one solution, but I think there needs to be other solutions that need to be examined in this issue. And hopefully, bringing Mr Burns together with the A9 safety group, we can get some resolution to resolve some of the major serious accidents that have taken place on the A9 and continue to take place on the A9 as we speak.
Thank you for that. Do other members have any contribution? Are members agreeable with that course of action? Thank you. Thank you for that. Okay. Can I formally close the meeting? There's no one in the gallery, but just for the record, the meeting is now closed. I have a couple of quick points.